Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran and my GW17 Team Selection. This week is obviously a very interesting week because I am a Haaland owner and there's a lot of questions to ask. I'm also currently recording out of Kyoto, Japan, so really excited to be on vacation, but also looking ahead towards another week of FPL. Effectively, what's going on here is we just need to wait for Haaland news up until effectively the deadline. And I think right now we have one great city source, which is going to be FPL Tony from social media platforms X or formerly Twitter. He probably would have the best update in terms of whether we would actually know if Haaland is ready and fit to play. And I think one of the biggest questions is not only if Haaland is going to be a part of the squad for Crystal Palace, but actually whether he's going to start. Because in my opinion, obviously, because of blank game week 18, there is a genuine possibility, let's say, if you have a very strong team and you don't have serious transfers to make, or you only have one or two transfers to make over the next 2 weeks, there is a possibility, of course, that you can go out of Haaland and that your team can benefit in the short term. And then you can actually bring Haaland back, maybe versus Everton away from home in game week 19, or just simply wait for, the easier fixture, which is going to be Sheffield United at home, and bring in Haaland then in game week 20. And I think the interesting here, of course, is if you, let's say, choose to go away from Haaland, how aggressive do you do that? I think if you wait for game week 20, what you should be doing is, going into players like Trent, going into players like Julian Alvarez. Whereas, let's say if you plan to just simply bring in Haaland back on game week 19, perfectly fine, perfectly reasonable, but you probably can't be that aggressive in terms of changing the structure of your team. And the biggest thing I would like to mention, of course, is depending on what we actually do in terms of our moves here, it's very important because, as I said, if you do plan to bring in Haaland game week 20 instead, then the biggest thing you can do there is actually make a very powerful move, which is to go out of Salah on game week 20 as well. So the reason why I say you can go into players like Trent, go into players like Julian Alvarez is prospectively, if you are planning to, let's say, already go into, let's say, game week 20 and take Salah out on that game week, then what you can do is just simply go from, let's say, someone like Archer in a 3-5-2 template and already make that a 3-4-3 for the time being. Wait for Haaland to come back on a good fixture on game week 20, then bring Salah out and continue to, for example, play your FPL team in a 1BM structure. And that's actually one of the plans that I have, and I'll talk about it depending on, what we actually find out on the deadline with Haaland possibilities. So the first possibility, of course, is that Haaland is completely out for Crystal Palace, but our expectation is that he comes back for Everton. In that situation, I think what we can do is think about taking a potential hit, not only going out of Haaland, but also to potentially go out of Julian Alvarez as well. So my plan in that situation would be to go from Archer to Alvarez, and that's enabled by Haaland to Watkins. The reason why I'm skipping Solanke here is because if Haaland is out for Crystal Palace at home, that just makes Alvarez that much better of a pick for that specific fixture on Crystal Palace, right? That just means that ultimately I would be owning Alvarez as a penalty taker for City, someone who should be playing 90 minutes because he also got rested in the Champions League, and that's obviously better than Dominic Solanke for me for this week. And even though I think Solanke has a better fixture this week, Luton Town at home, compared to, let's say, Watkins, who's facing Brentford away, the big thing for me, obviously, is that Watkins is going to be my captain for game week 18, unless an injury happens to him. And so in that situation, of course, it makes more sense to have Watkins as part of my 3-4-3 structure as opposed to Solanke, right, who unfortunately still has less short-term value to me than someone like Julian Alvarez if Haaland is away. Now, if Haaland seems like he's going to be a part of the squad for Crystal Palace, but we are not sure about his fitness, which is basically, if we don't get a confirmation that he starts, then I think the best situation here is to also maybe consider a slightly weaker move, right? Which is just to go from Haaland to Watkins in my team structure and then actually bring out, let's say, someone like Darwin later on game week 19 and move Darwin on to Haaland instead. So that's another opportunity that I have here. Now, for some managers who are on one free transfer and you have other issues to deal with in your team, I think deal with those other issues first, right? That's this, for example, third transfer scenario. Keep Haaland in your team probably if we think that he's going to come back for Everton away, or let's say, of course, if he's going to start for Crystal Palace at home, then obviously keep him. But yeah, I think those are the three transfer scenarios that you can really deal with. For me, I'm expecting that Haaland is not going to be able to play versus Crystal Palace at home just based on all the news that we've gotten so far. I know obviously Pep said that today that we'll get some news on Haaland and then we'll get an update. But the question, of course, is before the deadline, am I going to be sure of that? Right now, I'm actually going to make my transfer plans and my team selection here on the assumption that Haaland will probably not play significant minutes versus Crystal Palace at home, which means I will be pursuing maybe a Haaland out plan. Before we actually jump onto the team selection, I'd love to shout out the people who are already subscribed. Around 51% of our viewers right now are currently subscribed, but that also means another 49% of you aren't subscribed. If you guys are enjoying the content so far, particularly the cheat sheet series or the live streams, feel free to subscribe. That would actually really help the channel and help it grow. If you would like to comment or like on the video, that would be very helpful as well. So here with my team structure, what I'm going to be doing is playing Dubravka versus Fulham. Obviously, we have a choice of, let's say, playing Areola versus Wolves. I'm not exactly sure. We'll see what happens, of course, with Dubravka, because, of course, there was some illness and injury news. He actually played ultimately versus AC Milan. Wasn't great in terms of the shot stopping versus AC Milan, but it is what it is. I will probably be playing Dubravka in this case. If it seems like Dubravka is a bit of a doubt, I think I'll just go with Areola instead, but I'll probably still line up Dubravka as my first keeper. As far as my defense, I'll be lining up with Pedro Porro, Colwill, and Gabriel. Now, Tsimikas in this instance will actually be on my bench. But the question, of course, is going to be, once again, Europa League fixtures, right? Because with this Liverpool team, usually we get a telltale sign as to who's going to start, who's going to get rested, based on who actually starts in the Europa League fixture. Not only is it in the case where, let's say, Tsimikas is benched, that we think Tsimikas will start versus Man United, but also his peer, in the sense that the person competing in that position for him in the left-back spot is Joe Gomez. If we usually see, for example, Joe Gomez playing more minutes in that match, and maybe Tsimikas, for example, gets hooked off at, let's say, 65 minutes, that still probably informs us that Tsimikas will likely start. So if that is the case, then I will just simply move Gabriel onto first bench, and Tsimikas will play ahead of me, because I think right now this Man United team is lovely to target. As far as the midfield here, I will be playing with the stock standard midfield that I have. It's going to be Son, Palmer, Gordon, Saka, and Salah. And the question here, of course, is, what is going with Gordon? Two very early substitutions. I think clearly what's happening right now with this Newcastle team is honestly a lot of the players have been run into the ground. We've seen Trippier make a calamitous amount of mistakes. He's actually suspended for the weekend. But not only that, Trippier was also subbed off when they were actually trying to chase the game versus AC Milan, which is very odd because, of course, you'd see Trippier as one of their key attackers. But he clearly is struggling also. I believe he was hobbling in the game. We will also find out probably nothing from Eddie Howe. But that is obviously going to be a little bit of a hampener, or a dampener rather, for Trippier owners. I would say this is a decent opportunity to maybe move off of Trippier, because the way I see it, obviously Newcastle have 3 bad fixtures after they have 3 good fixtures, and if you're missing already one of the good fixtures, it might make sense to actually spend your funds elsewhere. Like, for example, if you wanted to upgrade into Trent, this would still be a good time to do so. As far as, let's say, the rest of my team, as I said, going back to Gordon with the Newcastle situation, I still think he's going to start versus Fulham. Right now, if you look at the squad, they're very, very weak in terms of depth. Fulham obviously look like a very competent team. And now that they're out of the Champions League, obviously, of course, the Premier League becomes an even larger priority, right? They need to claw back the points that they've lost with a lot of the poor away fixtures that they've played. And ultimately, Newcastle, I still think the strongest first 11 available still has Gordon in it. And I will be playing Gordon for this game here, a home fixture where, of course, Newcastle have been much improved. As far as Palmer, this is a no-brainer. Same with Saka, Son, and Salah. These are all players who are fantastic games on paper. And, of course, we saw the full strength of Son. Obviously, we've been talking about it lately. We're waiting for Son to take his penalty. He took his penalty versus Newcastle at home very well, and very happy about that. Happy about the team structure that we have. But very clearly, of course, when we look at the, let's say, next 4 to 5 game weeks, it's very clear we still need to make plans to move on away from Salah and Son. And maybe the question, of course, is, do we have enough value to keep one of Salah or Son during AFCON or during Asian Cup? But I think it's unlikely the case. Ultimately, yes, of course, team value is super important in FPL, but you're also seeing this season specifically that team value doesn't matter that much when you have incredible value options in the game. Now that, for example, Fulham and Bournemouth are playing especially well too, you actually now have access to options like Andreas, like Willian, like Jimenez from Fulham, or even Solanke or Tavernier from Bournemouth, or even the defenders. And with Wolves, obviously, we've seen Hwang become an amazing pick. Doucouré, probably a pick that I've neglected a little bit, just simply because the change in position was something where I wanted more sample size over, has clearly proven out to be extremely good, playing in that sort of 10 spot effectively behind Dominic Calvert-Lewin. So these are all the picks that we have in the game that boast incredible value. And I do think it makes sense to use that and utilize that to the best of our ability, especially when these teams have good fixture runs ahead. As far as my forward team, I will actually be going with Darwin and Watkins. The assumption here is that Darwin maybe would be rested in the Europa League game, or at least wouldn't play enough minutes for me to really cast into doubt that he would start versus Man United at home. Obviously, Gakpo is a very big threat. I think Luis Diaz himself has been playing a lot of minutes since Jota got injured. And the question, I suppose, is maybe is there a chance for Luis Diaz for himself to get benched as well? And maybe you could see, let's say, Darwin and Gakpo both start in some circumstances. Right now, I still think that there's a decent chance that Darwin will start. So the assumption here is that I will be able to go from Haaland to Watkins and actually, for example, plan for the future in the first transfer plan scenario that I mentioned. So as opposed to taking, let's say, super aggressive hits towards Julian Alvarez, I will just be doing the one free transfer Haaland to Watkins instead. And that will save me a lot of money. But of course, transfer plan number 2 really is taking that additional hit, completely changing my team structure apart, going from, let's say, Archer to Julian Alvarez, and then, for example, being enabled to go into Trent on game week 18. I think there is a big doubt here, obviously, because it does seem like Haaland seems to be quite okay. I'm not sure about, let's say, Alvarez's minutes as well, because he would be a very, very short-term punt if you think about it. KDB seems close to being back, and Haaland might not be struggling as much as we initially thought with the injury news. And so in that circumstance, I think it just makes sense to go Haaland to Watkins here. Have a strong team for game week 17. Game week 18, obviously, Darwin isn't perfect, but I still think there's a good chance that Darwin plays decent minutes there. Not everyone will have a good FPL team for game week 18. I will have one free transfer as well to address whatever situation I need to address. Ultimately, I have Matty Cash at the back of my bench almost at all times now, and we're looking at Matty Cash as potentially a pick who could save my team in game week 18, because if I want to bench Tsimikas and Gabriel, which I think is perfectly justifiable, I think Arsenal and Liverpool will probably score. And in that situation, of course, I would love to have Cash versus Sheffield United at home. And I think that's a very plausible option, right? Because Cash has been benched a few games. I don't think he's, for example, been in exile, right, from the team. It's just the case that, of course, they have so much more defensive solidity when they're playing versus some of these tough teams like an Arsenal, like a Man City, that it makes sense to play Konsa effectively as a right back. But versus Sheffield United at home, I'd like to hope that Cash actually has an opportunity to play here. And because I actually haven't had any defensive injuries or issues, because I have Colwell and Porro already ahead of time, I think that I can keep Cash for game week 18. And actually, I can probably roll in game week 18 as well, which would mean that I have some very strong plans available for myself, either on 18 if, let's say, I want to replace Darwin then, or, of course, on 19 if I just want to bring in Haaland and then make another move on top of that. So those are going to be my plans, really, for game week 17. Obviously, I think we just need to wait for Haaland news. There are many scenarios and many sort of plans you need to make in your mind in terms of how to address that situation. I will just be, for example, taking the understanding that I think Haaland will probably not participate very seriously in the Crystal Palace at home game. So that's the assumption here for this video. Otherwise, I'd love to see you guys on the deadline stream, even though I think it'll be at 1:30 a.m. for me here in Japanese time. But otherwise, I hope you guys have a wonderful game week ahead, and I'd love to see you guys very shortly.